Hi, sweeties. How are you doing? Welcome to Naya Sing, and thank you all so much for all the love and support. Hope you all are doing great. So, this Arab man actually came out to talk about why colonial structure will never allow Africa to grow, and he is saying the truth because the structure has actually been, the system has been made to frustrate citizens or Africans as a whole with the help of the leaders. Because if I tell you it is all, I mean, like colonial, this thing they have a lot of power, but with the help of the government in Africa, right? For example, Nigeria, I will use them as an example because it is a living hell. When you come to Nigeria, Nigeria is blessed with mineral resources, like, from gas, oil, and all of it. All there is nothing they are not blessed with. But to my great surprise, they are not making use of all the things that they are blessed with. But it is the people from the outside that are benefiting more out of it. And also, I am not going to overlook the greed and corruption, of the government, because majority of the government are very corrupt. They use them as pawns against themselves and against their own citizen. I just do not understand how you have to sell away all your just to be with. Let's get into
which is the colonial legacies. And of course, a lot of people say, well, come on, colonialism is over. It's been, several decades since independence, but we have the unfinished business of decolonizing economic structures. So I focus on the economic structures that actually produce the results that we're looking at. So when it comes to the colonial role that was imposed on the African continent, it can be summarized in three basic points. Number one, we're supposed to be the place for cheap raw materials for the industrialized world. We still play that role today. Number two, we were supposed to be the place that consumes technology and industrial output from the global north. We still play that role today. And number three, and most importantly, we're supposed to be the place where obsolete technologies, assembly line manufacturing that is no longer needed in the industrialized world is outsourced to us under the label of development, cooperation, job creation, technical assistance, all of that. But effectively what it does is that it permanently locks us at the bottom of the global value chain. That was the role we played during colonial times, and unfortunately that is the role we continue to play today. So colonialism, of course, was not a system for development. It was not designed to achieve sustainable development goals or a just transition or justice or anything. Colonialism was a system of extraction, of abuse. We should not be surprised that the same colonial structures, economic colonial structures that persist today are producing these bad results of malnutrition, of poverty, of socioeconomic exclusion. So that's why in the context of the just transition and the context of decarbonization, we always say we cannot decarbonize a system that hasn't been structurally and economically decolonized yet. And when it comes to kind of the visible manifestation of these problems, the issue of external debt, that is debt denominated in foreign currencies, in dollars and euros. It is a serious problem because it takes a huge amount of fiscal policy space that doesn't allow our governments to invest in the building blocks of development and prosperity, such as basic health and education and infrastructure, because we have to prioritize paying the external debt. But external debt is actually a symptom of deeper structural issues that have colonial roots. Number one, food deficits. Number two, energy deficits. And number three, manufacturing deficits. And I can explain each very briefly so we can understand why these are fundamental. When I say food deficits, according to UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, Africa today imports 85% of its food. 85%. When less than 100 years ago, during colonial times, we used to be the breadbasket for colonial powers. And what happened is that there's a redesign of the system as soon as we gained independence. In 1955, for example, in Europe, at the Treaty of Rome meeting, the Europeans said we have a food security problem for Europe because they were so dependent on Africa. And that introduced a common agricultural policy, which is in place to this day. So what is CAP? It's heavy agricultural subsidies to produce the core crops in Europe, such as corn and wheat and soybean and the core food security items. And of course, it wasn't just Europe that did that. It was the United States, Canada, Australia, the former Soviet Union, which is why Russia and Ukraine today dominate the grain industry. And what it did is that it forced African farmers out of business because they couldn't compete with the subsidized wheat and corn coming from the global north. So we had to redesign our agriculture to specialize in cash crops for exports. Coffee, tea, tobacco, bananas, all the complementary items. So today we live in a world where we consume what we don't produce and we produce what we don't consume. And that's why we have real food insecurity on the African continent and the rest of the global south, obviously. So that's the food deficiency. Number two, energy deficiency. When I say energy deficits in Africa, I include our biggest oil exporter on the continent. Nigeria today imports 100% of its gasoline, not by accident, by design. Angola, our second largest oil exporter, imports 80% of its fuel from international markets. So we're constantly denied the technology processing, technology for drilling, the technology for refining. So we export crude oil, we import refined petrochemicals. You export the cheap stuff, you import the more expensive stuff. So you're always in a deficit situation. And finally, the manufacturing deficits, the fact that the only type of manufacturing base that we were allowed to have is the kind where we have to import the machines, we have to import the fuel to power the factories, we have to import the intermediate components to be assembled with low-cost labor, and we even import the packaging. So we end up with the value-added content of what we export is low value added, what we import is high value added. So you can double, triple, quadruple your exports, you're always locked at the bottom of the value chain. And here's how it's manifested. You have these structural deficits, the most fundamental areas. As you know, no country can function without food, without fuel, without manufacturing. So we have structural trade deficits. And what structural trade deficits do is that they weaken our currencies relative to the dollar, relative to the euro. And with the weaker currency, anything I need to import the next morning, whether it's food or fuel or medicine, you import it at a higher price. So we literally import inflation in the most sensitive areas of the economy, therefore hurting the most vulnerable people in society. And that immediately forces our governments into a defensive position to protect the most vulnerable. So what do? We subsidize food, we subsidize fuel, which makes sense to protect the most vulnerable, but you can't do that for 8 decades. And we ask our central banks to stabilize the exchange rate, to fight inflation. And the way they do it is by using a band-aid solution, which is borrowing more dollars. And that gets the external debt into a vicious cycle that is unsustainable, which means now the government is completely obsessed with prioritizing economic activity that will allow us to earn dollars as quickly as possible so that we service the debt. And we deprioritize economic activity that is actually transformational, that is actually the foundation of development and prosperity. And that is the essence of why we neglect so many of the priorities. And that's why a lot of the fiscal policy space that our governments have is dedicated to servicing the debt, which is by design the colonial architecture that was imposed on us. So that's why we say we can't really achieve the sustainable development goals or a just transition or any of the goals that we want to achieve under a system, an economic system that's still structurally colonized when we have economies that are technically steered from abroad.
So this is all I got from this video, and sincerely speaking, if only African leaders. I mean, most of the things he mentioned are literally what Africans are going through. Maybe not all, but majority. Because if you look around what it's going on, you definitely will understand that inflation rate right now is a mess, right? Nigerians, Ghana, like some other countries. I mean, maybe a dollar is like $1 to probably 1 naira. Right now, it's like a lot. I mean, causing inflation when it comes to buying, selling, and also the importation of goods. Now, why is it that the colonial structure will never allow Africa to grow. And I keep saying, why is it that we keep getting Africa like leaders that are for the Westerners, not for the people? Because majority of the problems that Africans are having are from the leaders. But then when you look around, you find that the leaders are leading, but there is someone controlling them from somewhere. When you look at political, economic, social, religion, governance, they all must go under its period because all these are the factors suppressing and hindering most of this, should I say the struggle or the work that people are doing to make sure that there is better Africa, right? And I kind of feel like that the power will still sit in the power of the colony, as in like the colonial masters, because check around what it's going around from most of the okay now let's start with the most of the countries that have been going through crisis, especially when it comes to Africa, the Congo, Sudan, and okay now Haiti and some other ones, right? When you look around and investigate, you definitely will find out that it is the Westerners that are doing it. That's why most of the like when you come to Africa, the economy is absolutely a mess. Like it's totally messed up. And then they said Africa is where they get most of their produce or most of the raw materials, oil and all that they use, cocoa and the rest of them. Now, like he said before, most of the produce they get, like they were depending on Africa for so many things, especially foods and all that. But right now, if you check around, you definitely will see that, like in Africa, majority Africans are import. We really do need a creative and sustainable way of taking back the power of educating, manufacturing, and doing every other thing because we cannot leave our economy to them. Now, the economy, like, the way the things are going, the economy as it stands right now is crumbling. Check around some countries in Africa that they have literally borrowed even their soul. Like they have so much money that they owe, right? They have borrowed, and borrowed that one day people might wake up and they tell them that they've used them for loan or that they have to pay some maybe particular amount because the country is owing so and so. So that is how bad it is. Really, I was checking all of this. Then I found out that when you look at the oil and gas, when you come to Nigeria, most especially the oil in Nigeria, Nigeria is so blessed with mineral and natural resources. But from what we can see, trust me, it looks like we are even begging for most of the mineral resources that we have. And I mean, the colonial masters really came with a lot. Now, really, the fact is that I really don't know how, but it is really very much achievable if the leaders are willing to work. But it looks like the leaders are not willing to work with the citizen because most of I don't understand how when you come to, let's say, as like for example, maybe Nigeria, you see so many educated people, nurses, doctors, engineers, like so many people into so many things, and you find out that the system is not prospering them, right? I mean, the system will just make your life miserable. It is that bad. But immediately they leave, you see them doing better than. That is to tell you that the system also is designed to frustrate its citizen. Now, example, I will continue to use Nigeria because I am very familiar with their politics and all that. In Nigeria also, The leader barely stay 1 month in Nigeria. He is always on leave. He is always on one silly political whatever that never manufacture anything meaningful for the government or the citizen. But he is always jetting in and jetting out. On whose expense? Today he is in France. What is he going to France to do all the time? That is to tell you some of them already have, like, they do not even value the citizen at all. As long as the Western are paying as hard or as much as they can, I mean, I don't care about the citizen. This is the life most Africans are living. And is he correct? He is absolutely correct with what he said. But yeah, it is what it is. But I really hope that Africans wake up, because the situation is like, getting above the water level. Because when you ask me how are you doing, I am trying to keep my head above the water level, but it is beyond the water level. And the earlier they wake up and know that they've been using us as pawns against ourselves, the better for them. Because as it stands, it is really on a delicate level. See you all in my next video. Bye for now.